The title of the webinar is Diversity, the Road to the Performing Board. We are so honored today to have two special guests with us. We have the California Treasurer, Fiona Ma, and James White, who is former CEO of Jamba Juice and board director of public, actually, and private companies, quite an expert in terms of board service. I'm Charlotte Laurent-Ottomane. I am the executive director of the 30% Coalition. For those of you who are not aware of the Coalition, we are a national organization founded in 2011. Our mission is to advocate for corporate board diversity, including women and people of color. We have a significant membership base representing 7 trillion in assets under management, including institutional investors, state treasurers, private equity, public companies, professional services firms, and most of the women and diverse organizations across the US. What brought us here today? I think that everyone recognizes that board diversity and diversity within your companies is essential. We're going to focus on board diversity today. There is increasing investor pressure, stakeholder pressure for gender and racial diversity at the board level, C-suite, and throughout the company. I think for some of you, you have a mandate to do this, a legal mandate, which makes it even more pressing. And I think that we're going to see that happening in other states. Certainly Washington State has passed some legislation, not quite as stringent as California, but nevertheless, for mandating diversity. We all agree on the business case. I don't think that's even necessary to say it anymore, but it's there. A diverse board is a better companies, but more importantly, companies across the US to address the diversity issue. We had a webinar in August where we had 600 women who are aspiring to serve on boards, and Treasurer Ma has a database, which she'll talk about in a bit, for companies to go to find qualified candidates. Today, we want to focus, though, on what we call the demand side, which is the mission of the coalition, and which I think is very important. I think the majority of our audience today are corporate leadership, CEOs, CFOs, board chairs, non-gov chairs, et cetera. And we want to talk about how you do this. I mean, the pressure is great. The goal is not to just put a woman or a person of color on the board, check the box and say, okay, maybe they'll leave me alone, or 2 boxes if you're in California. The goal is to really think about this and use this opportunity to assess your board and make sure that it is the best performing board going forward. So I'm going to, before I go into the processes that we're talking about, I'd like to turn it over to Treasurer Ma and James White to give a brief description of their professional highlights and why they are so committed to the cause of diversity. Treasurer Ma, I'll turn it over to you first.
Yeah, thank you, Charlotte, and it's great to partner with you and the 30% Coalition. We had a great webinar in August, a lot of excitement around it and a lot of interest, and so I'm glad we are all back together with an expert, James White. He not only has run companies, but sits on a number of corporate boards. So I look forward to learning a little bit more about the secrets on getting on a paid corporate board, which is what a lot of the women that we know in our networks. They've sat on different commissions, governmental commissions, and a lot of nonprofit boards, but being paid to sit on a corporate board and being able to utilize our experience and our qualifications and our input is something I think many women are interested in finding out more about. But for me, it started out that I started my public professional service or professional career working for one of the big 8 accounting firms. And back then, there were no women partners, very few women in senior management. And I left after 5 years to start my own practice and became president of the Asian Business Association, where now I was to represent more women and minority business owners to get contracting opportunities either through the government or through the private sector. And I started to understand that without setting some sort of goals and having leadership who was deliberate about setting and meeting these goals, diversity was never going to happen. And I saw that under Mayor Willie Brown, when he was mayor of San Francisco for 8 years. He appointed very diverse individuals to his different boards and agencies, and we had a goal of 20% using, MWBE contractors for our contracting for all of the divisions across his administration. And then Prop 209 passed here in California, which really sought to stifle the use of data and discourage these type of goals for women and minority small business owners. And we have been living under the Prop 209 era for the last 30 years now, and there is an initiative on the November ballot, Prop 216, to overturn Prop 209. And myself and many of my colleagues in the legislature, people of color, understand that if we are going to seek equity, we need to understand and know what the data is and the statistics out there. Because even though we know and see and think this is happening without being able to track accurately, we are never going to see more equity and inclusion. I also, this is my fourth elected position as the state treasurer, and each time I encounter different industry groups, and in this case, I am the state banker. So I meet with a lot of banks, uh, public underwriters, folks in public finance, and it is not very diverse from the top down. And so my interest was renewed after SB 826 passed. It was the Hannah Beth Jackson bill and Tony Atkins bill that required a certain amount of women on corporate boards, public corporate boards for those companies that are headquartered here in California. And lo and behold, now more women are getting appointed to these boards. And so it does work. Right now, there is a bill on the governor's desk, AB 979 by Assemblymember Holden, that would also require a certain amount of folks from underrepresented communities to also sit on corporate boards. So we are doing what we can here in California to level the playing field. And as you said, Charlotte, sometimes it requires leadership, either through legislation or leadership through individuals who are going to set those targets and make sure that we are hitting them. So I look forward to being here and participating in this conversation here today.
Thanks, Treasurer Ma. James, could you give us a little highlights of your career?
Charlotte, thrilled to be on with you. Have been a fan of the 30% Coalition, and we've been friends for a number of years. So I'm excited to be on this call with you, Treasurer Ma. Super excited to be in this discussion with you. I'm a former public company CEO. I was chairman and CEO at Jamba, 30-year operating executive across a range of industries. For me, I come to this discussion as an operating executive who's led this work inside all the companies and industries that I've been in. And as a board member over the last 20 years, I've sat on some 15 boards. I've chaired 5 of those boards as chairman. I've sat on all the committees on the board and chaired every committee, excluding audit. I'm a passionate champion for diversity and inclusion. Founded a nonprofit Directors Academy about 4 years ago, and we've worked with people of color and women to really change the trajectory of those underrepresented groups in the boardroom over the course of the last 4 years. We've had about 150 folks to come through our programs and have had great success seeing those participants placed in various boards across industry. thrilled to be here and excited for the discussion.
I definitely will come back to both of you. I already have a lot of questions just from what you said. To put this in context for our audience, I would like to briefly go through the process of diversifying your board. And I know that there are many progressive companies out there that have achieved this, but there are many who haven't and that are struggling. So again, this is a collaborative effort, and we really are here to help. So look forward to your questions about this. But just briefly, and I'm speaking, to leadership now. I think it's important, no matter where you are in the process, to engage your board. Any change that you're going to make will be easier if they're with you. And I think that everybody agrees today, and you have different degrees of urgency, obviously, but I think it has to be a board decision. It's not a CEO decision. It's not a chair decision. It is a board decision for it to go smoothly. So I really encourage you to engage them at the beginning of the process. I think that the first step after that is to look at your governance policies, your company bylaws. An interesting statistic is that 60% of the companies in California that have appointed a woman following the law change have appointed new directors. They're not replacing directors. So I think today it's really coming down, and not just in California, but everywhere. You either have to increase your board size, or you have to figure out how to get rid of directors that are sitting there in order to bring in diverse candidates. That's the bottom line. I know it's not nice to hear, but I think it's a reality, and it's coming, I believe, faster than we even think. So to do that, I think if you look at your bylaws, and maybe you do need to change out some directors, that's obviously your call. But your bylaws, if you do want to add a director, your bylaws have to support that. So I urge you to go back, as a board, look at your bylaws, your corporate governance documents, and make sure that they are supportive of any change that you want to make. I think secondly, that in this environment, it's so important to look at your markets, like take a new look. We have all seen unprecedented change coming from the COVID-19, coming from the social unrest that's in the countries and in your companies, I'm sure. Markets have changed, and your response to this has to change. Is your board ready to face this? What will your markets be tomorrow, 6 months from now, 2 years from now? And I think that your board, who provides leadership and oversight, has to be able to understand and to be able to guide the company forward. I think that then you need to determine if your board is equipped to do that. And for me, the best way to do that is in a matrix format, which is to list your board members on the vertical axis, and the competencies that you've determined that you need on the horizontal axis, and start checking it off. And of course, in your competencies, include gender, race, and ethnicity. I would be surprised if you did not find gaps. I hope that you don't, but more than likely you will, both in competencies and, for those of you who do not have diversity, certainly in the gender, race, and ethnicity. I think once you decide that, you can then decide, do you need to realign? Do you need to add board members? Do you need to retire some of your board members? Where do you need to go with this? At that point, you start filling the vacancies, and obviously, you want to consider diverse candidates. So apply what we call the Rooney Rule, which is to include women and people of color in the candidate pool. This will ensure that you are going through the proper diligence in terms of diversifying your board. What the outcome will be is obviously your call. I think that what investors want to see and stakeholders want to see is that you're actually doing it. And I think what Treasurer Ma said earlier about disclosure is going to be the call to action, certainly this proxy season. Investors want to know what you're doing. They want to know when you're going to do it, how you're going about it. And believe me, we're adamant about that. We understand that it's not that easy, but if you can disclose what you're doing, what current composition you have, then I think that would make a big step going forward, and it will pave the way to diversifying your board, both in talent and in gender and race and ethnicity. I don't mean for this to sound so simple. It's a very high-level roadmap, but hopefully it can give you some guidance about how to go about this. So I'd like to turn to our two experts on this. And James, I'm going to turn to you first. How has the call and the action for diversity on corporate boards changed over the last couple of years? I know that most of the boards that you serve on are far beyond what people expect in terms of diversity, but in general, what has changed? What's changed this year, and what changes do you see going forward?
So if I go back in time, Charlotte, and look at the push, both overall and legislatively, to add women to boards, we have seen significant discussion around gender equality in terms of the boardroom, and I've seen really significant momentum over the course of the last couple of years. If I fast forward to the current moment that we sit in, as the company is facing this awakening around structural racism and race and racial justice and equity, there is a very different conversation happening in and around boardrooms. There are public statements by 200 of the largest companies about building an anti-racist company. So that's something I've never seen in my history. If I think about my colleagues in the boardrooms and the CEOs that I've talked to over the course of the last 60, 90 days, there is a big movement inside their companies and inside the boardroom to really be more thoughtful around this conversation. So I'm hopeful with where we sit today. And I think just from a practical perspective, the best companies have always been focused on board refreshment in a thoughtful way to include gender and ethnicity. And for those of us that haven't done that work, I think it requires a plan like we do for everything else, and you have to measure anything that matters. But I think there is a thoughtful roadmap. You talked about pressure. I think pressure is a privilege as it relates to this needed change that should happen. I think there is sufficient supply of very talented people of color and women to fill the seats that are available. It'll require slightly different thinking on where you source candidates moving forward, but board succession, board refreshment, the matrix that you described to look at skill sets and talents, I would submit that you need to take a look at the skill set and talent that you have on the board today, but then look forward kind of post-COVID and a few years out and say, what's the talent that'll be required moving forward? And then build your board forward to accommodate that, whether that requires you adding talent to your board or just refreshing talent as you work through board succession over time. I'll pause there.
That's great. Do you think that it's possible, like the process that I described, again, it's somewhat hypothetical. I think it's possible, if the board goes into high gear, to accomplish it in this proxy season. Maybe not to actually have a diverse candidate, but am I being unrealistic? Is it something that companies can do if they start now?
I think they certainly can lay the groundwork. I actually am slightly maybe more aggressive and more optimistic than you. I think you can certainly identify and have candidates that are slated at least as a part of your board succession process, because there is an ample amount of talent that would be available to fill the seats that are available. And I think what many companies are finding, those companies that have less diverse management teams and boards have found themselves ill-suited coming through the pandemic and COVID-19, and then this issue that they're finding in the communities in which they do business. I mean, those leadership teams and boards that lack diversity have found themselves in many ways kind of flat-footed. And that actually puts their brands and companies a bit at risk. I've watched companies that, on the other hand, have more diverse boards, more diverse management teams. They've navigated really both of these challenges with much less challenge. And I'll just focus in, a couple industries in particular. I come out of the food service kind of restaurant space. 2/3 of the frontline workers are people of color.
Yeah.
And the management teams that are more reflective of the leadership teams that are more reflective of the population, and the boards that have more inclusive leadership, in my estimation, have done a better job of navigating through the layers of challenges that face their own workforces. And in an environment that we sit in, the stakeholder groups are actually holding us more into account to have more diverse management teams and more diverse boards, and it's showing up in the actions and policies.
Okay, good. Treasurer Ma, you serve on a lot of boards, private boards running your pension plans in California, et cetera. Are you seeing these same issues at the private level in terms of board assessment, board diversity? I know that a lot of, the large pension plan boards are gender diverse. But can you talk to us a little bit about what you're seeing on your side?
Yeah, so I just want to go back to two things that you mentioned earlier. Number one, the bylaws. I do think it is really important to establish some sort of term limits. And that's kind of the way that you can cycle off some of the board members that perhaps, you wouldn't want to ask them to leave necessarily, but it also forces the board and the leadership to think about the pipeline and who's going to come in, and whether you are looking like the state or your constituent base. So I do think it's important. And in government, I think the state of California passed term limits in 1995, and that has really changed the people that have been elected to state level positions like the legislature as well as constitutional offices, because it's really, the what is it called? The fittest, if you're fit, then you will continue to move on. If you are not, then the voters will not, vote you back in. So I'll give you an example. I served in the legislature from 2006 to 2012, and I was only the 112th woman to ever serve in the legislature since 1849. And honestly, I don't think I would have been elected, because we had, Willie Brown was in the assembly, John Burton was in the Senate, and they had served many, many years. And, if you're in this, you're part of a team, you don't run against the incumbents. But for term limits now, they both had to retire, and that gave me and other folks an opportunity to run for office. And so I do think setting term limits is important. Also in government, we have transparency, right? We know every employee that works for state and local government. We know how much they make. even after they retire, we know what their pension is and what their benefits are. And I think that is a good check and balance in terms of holding, all of us accountable because the numbers are there, right? So if I am hiring in my office, everyone in my office knows who is working, how much they're getting paid, and if there is inequities, because someone says, well, I've got a master's degree, and how come this person just started and they're 22 years old and they get paid more than me? Well, it really forces us to think about, equity and gender balance, especially when it comes to salaries. And I think there's not a lot of transparency in the private sector, and it's hard to figure out, how many board members you really have to go into their 10K or their quarterly report and like dig through it all. And so as we are doing a better job in tracking now because of bills like SB 826, we are demanding that type of transparency, and corporate boards, organizations understand that we are looking very closely, and that, our boards or organizations should look like the people we represent.
Right. So you're in a state that has a very well, both of you actually, very special circumstances, and time is running out. What advice do you have for the companies? The thing that worries me is that they're just going to appoint a woman just to not pay the fine, or to have a breather in terms of the next round or something. What advice and I'll start with you, Treasurer Ma, what advice do you have for the California companies and Washington State? I mean, Washington State, as I said, is not as intense right now as California, but it's certainly, I think they're moving in that direction, as is others. So
Right.
can you give us some advice about what they can do?
Well, I think for those companies that just want to add a woman, that is a step. And I don't fault them for that because, like I said before, if you don't have this transition plan, it is really hard to ask someone to leave a corporate board, especially if they're getting paid, number one. Number two, they're part of that organization for a long time. And, you know, whatever the reasons are. So I think adding more slots to a corporate board is not a bad thing, but who are they adding? Are they adding, the CEO's daughter or the cousin or the niece of their legal counsel? And so it continues to stay kind of that same little tight knit group. That's not going to be helpful in the long run. It really should be diversifying your board and being a little more inclusive, so you bring other voices to the table that you might not necessarily hear within your own little bubble group.
Hey, James?
And for me, Charlotte, I'd make a couple points. I'd actually encourage the folks that are on the call with us today is to link how they diversify their board to their strategy. So I'd start with the company's strategy, and again go back to the evaluation of the current capabilities of the board, and look critically for gaps in opportunity to expand the skill set of the board. And then I'd be thoughtful, and the point I'd make is there's plenty of talent here in the state of California and across the country to serve on the board seats that'll become available, driven by some of the current legislation. And there just needs to be a thoughtful kind of discipline process. What concerns me more is how thoughtful the onboarding and kind of intake process is to make whoever it is we add new to our boards effective and significant contributors to the board. So I think there needs to be as much thought on who you add as to how you bring them on board and make them effective in the boardroom. And then that adds to the value added of bringing in a more diverse experience to the boardroom.
And I'm going to kind of throw you a softball here. What do you think about disclosure? I mean, one of the things that as we're moving through the proxy season, and I'm speaking with companies because we've sent them a letter because they have no women or one woman on their board. You know, I go to their website to try to, you know, and I may get an answer back that, well, we have women and we have people of color. And so I go to their website and there are no pictures and there's just a name. How can we change that? I mean, I don't understand the reticence, but I know that it exists. The disclosure piece, I think, how can we get across that it's okay not to have it today, but if you're working on it for tomorrow, that will be okay for the moment? Can you talk a little bit about the mindset of companies and why they're resisting this? Those that are.
Treasurer Mao, you want to go or you want me to go?
Oh, no, I want to hear, you know,
Sure.
we do a lot of disclosures. Our pictures are all over. I try to, you know, post whoever I appoint, make sure the picture is there with the bio. So
Yeah, so what I would say is, you know, sometimes change is hard. And I think the reticence to fully disclose and potentially share pictures might be a part of that challenge. But what I would kind of point to is the best companies do great disclosures, are proud of the boards and the management teams that they've assembled, give more, not less data in the way they publicly disclose. One of the things that I ask as a board member of the CEOs and management teams as we talk about succession inside the companies, I request pictures because a picture, you know, kind of communicates 1,000 words. And, you know, one of the things that I've learned kind of over time as an experienced board member, when there are pictures as you're doing succession, it becomes apparent to everybody in the room where the issues are, and it allows you to probe and ask questions. You know, so I think the same applies here. But the best companies are already disclosing. There's more, not less information, and that's going to be forced as we move forward by all of the stakeholders.
Treasurer Ma, what's your?
yeah, no, I mean, I totally agree. Sometimes it's not easy. Like my last organization that I started, I wanted to post everyone's picture, and some people don't want their pictures out there. They're a little bit more private. I found that out. So, but for the leaders, the executive directors that I appoint, I definitely, you know, whenever I send out a press release, I will be tweeting another one out today. I hired someone yesterday, you know, face with the press release. I think the more transparency, the more we're held accountable. I think that's a good thing. And like I think James said, some people are more comfortable about that. Some people are not. But, you know, the ones that are proud of their leadership team, obviously we like to promote that more. And the ones that aren't as diverse, you know, want to just kind of wait and see to see whether they're going to be forced to do it, or, you know, there's an article maybe that comes out eventually that forces them to change their mindset.
Okay, I'm going to shift lanes just a little bit in our last few minutes. I'd like to talk about the candidates. One of the things that we have found over the last couple of years, and I think it's still an issue today, less so, but boards tend to think that all of the board members, and this is you know, a generalization, and some do not, have to be CEOs. They are either, you know, CEOs of the same industry, which if that's possible, and of course they're all men because you don't have that many women CEOs. How can we help companies understand, I guess, and accept the fact that a good board member does not have to be a CEO, and that can have other qualities in terms of board service? And Treasurer Ma, you're shaking your head. I'll start with you.
Yeah, so I spent a number of years trying to recruit more women to apply for a gubernatorial position. Under Governor Jerry Brown for 8 years, he committed to have 50% of his commissioners be women. And that meant our organization, California Women Lead, we went around and did all these trainings to dispel the myths about what it takes to sit on a board. A lot of women would say, well, I'm not involved in politics, or I'm not, part of a political process. I've never donated to the governor. I'm not sure I have the qualifications. And we have to let them know that, for most of the boards, we want someone from the public who brings in a new perspective, right? That is going to ask those questions that everyone may think is a stupid question, but it's always, almost like an aha moment for folks because they've never thought about it that way, right? And so that's what we have to do is in our recruitment process is really say, listen, as long as you have time, because sometimes you have to take work off and be able to come up in the past to Sacramento to attend meetings. And then you're also committed to make sure you show up and do your homework, right? Because the governor doesn't want to look bad if he appoints someone and you're like a no-show, right? Those two things I think are the most important. And we have gotten many, many thousands of women to apply in California, and we have been consistently at 50% for our women that are serving on gubernatorial appointments. But it also took his appointment secretary, Mona Pascal Rogers, who is Filipina, who has, also, come from our world that diversity is better. And she also went out and did these trainings herself so that women would say, listen, I am the appointment secretary, right? I want to get to know you. If you want to get an appointment, submit your application, feel free to reach out to me, keep in touch, and usually those women that were the most, I wouldn't say aggressive, but the ones that were the most interested followed up and showed up and, would say, hey, I'm still interested, here's an article, or this is what I've done, are now appointed on, governmental boards. And then that usually leads to running for office. Because I always say, once you sit on a board and understand that there's not real magic behind, government, it's really about the people. And if you care about the people and want to serve, then the next step is usually looking at your elected officials and saying, I think I can do a better job. And then that propels those women, to run for office. And even in our legislature, we have had the most amount of women this season here in the state of California. And so we are preparing the pipeline. And if you look at our legislature, we definitely have a majority minority members now in the legislature, partly because of the term limits and also, those opportunities of opening up the pipeline to bring others up.
That's great. James, what about you? One of the moves today, when people can't find CEOs, are looking at functional roles. Could you address that in the boardroom?
Yeah, I think there is any number of critical functional operating executives that add tremendous value in the boardroom. If I think about the various industries that I sit on boards in for digital transformation leaders, cybersecurity capabilities, folks that bring significant functional expertise around any of the people and human capital areas, I'm seeing being added more and more to boards. And then people at larger companies that have deep P&L backgrounds sitting on smaller private company boards that bring greater public or private company boards that bring greater sophistications. But and there's a number of organizations that help prepare those kinds of candidates. And the reality, unfortunately, at least today, is there are not many women and people of color that occupy either the CFO roles or the CEO roles. Those are going to be limited overall, but there is a significant amount of candidates that are in big operating roles. There's a number of organizations like Corporate Latino Directors, ASIN, and the Executive Leadership Council, which is 500 or 600 African American operating executives that are at least direct reports of the CEO. So there's plenty of talent. I think we've got to go to different places as we think about, how to populate the boards and kind of fill out the capabilities of our boards. And I think increasingly, at least sitting CEOs are not allowed by many of their companies to sit on much more than one board, if one board at all. So I just think the board world we're operating in, and given the complexity of the CEO jobs, there are less sitting CEOs that are sitting on boards, especially multiple boards today. So I think that creates broader opportunity for us to bring in operating executives with different functional areas of expertise into the boardroom. And I see a significant movement to add that kind of talent to the boardroom.
On the issue of, go ahead.
Remember at our last webinar in August, there was one woman who actually campaigned to sit on a board. Like, she really wanted to be on this company board. She did the research, she put her name in, she called people, anyone who knew someone. And sometimes that's what I say to folks who are interested. I said, I can't read your mind. Like, you need to let me know if you want to sit on a corporate board or you want to work for a specific company, and then help formulate a strategy, right, James? Because a lot of us, we sit and we hope someone picks us out of the air, because we're this or we're that and we're talented. But sometimes we have to also put a little more effort into getting on these corporate boards or commissions.
Well, you've got to be intentional, Treasurer Mao. You've got to be intentional, and folks that want to, sit on corporate boards, you've got to make that a part of your agenda, and you've got to network with people that either sit on the boards that you want to sit on or know people that sit on those boards, because the reality is 2/3 of the board appointments don't come through a formal search process. Now, that's a little bit the problem with the lack of diversity, but that's what the reality is. Most of the boards don't go out to search. The most common, and this is one of the ways that boards kind of stay the way they are today, they go to the current board members and they say, who do you know? And if you've got a non-diverse board, it just becomes a cycle.
So to that point, to both of you, and then we can open the floor to questions if there are any. Where do companies go? So let's assume the companies have accelerated their process. They've changed their bylaws. Everybody is in line in terms of their competencies. They know what their markets, or they think they know what their markets are going to be in the next 2 or 3 years. Where do they find candidates? Because to your point, James, I think that is a big challenge. Do you have any, and both of you are such champions of women and people of color, to move this process forward. Can you give companies some advice about where to go and how to find candidates?
I think there's a number of organizations, Charlotte. I think many of the women's organizations that you partner with would be likely places. WCD is a place where there are women directors, and they're good sources for candidates. Athena Alliance out here does fantastic work. I'm a member of the Executive Leadership Council for African American executives and potential board members. Corporate Latino Directors is a fantastic organization. ASEAN has a fantastic potential board candidates. And the work that we do at Directors Academy, we run across lots of diverse, what we view as kind of next generation people of color and women that'll go into the boardroom, just to name a few.
Treasurer Ma, you have a special.
Yes. So when I got elected,
treasure chest.
When I got elected earlier last year, I looked around and I said, okay, so now we passed SB 826. Okay, who is compiling all of the resumes, right? Like, when you want to apply to a gubernatorial appointment, you know where to send it, and they have a vetting team that does extensive vetting. But when it came to the corporate boards, I didn't find anyone was stepping up to do this. So I said, well, let me just put it out there. And I crafted a press release and said, who is interested, women are interested in sitting on a corporate board, please send me your resume. And I think 200 resumes came in that first week. And I was kind of shocked because people were paying attention, number one. And number two, they took the initiative to send in, their resumes to our office. We have since expanded it and set up a little, website where people can put in their, input their information so that we can better sort who is in our database. And we've got about 400 names now. So for companies who are looking for more women, diverse women, we have a database. You can also ask us, right? James, I'm sure if someone said, hey, who can you recommend in the African-American community or Latino community or LGBT community? I mean, we all could think about those folks who we think are good candidates and ready candidates and people who we could stand behind. I think that is
Absolutely
part of our charge here as well.
One of the things that the coalition has been doing the last couple of years is actually, you mentioned, James, our large group of women in diverse organizations. We have, particularly in the private sector, private equity, but some public companies are coming to us with board positions, and I am forwarding them on to the different, including Treasurer Ma's staff for the database for candidates and sending them back. And I think it's working extremely well. I mean, this is not necessarily the coalition's mission. We're trying to increase those seats, but I think that I think the lack of candidates is not an excuse. I think that we have plenty that can serve on boards. So the only question that I saw that we could address before we wrap this up is accountability. Should boards be held accountable? Should companies be held accountable? Should CEOs or board chairs be held accountable for increasing the diversity going forward? James?
The point that I'd make, anything that matters in business, you measure, right? And I actually think this matters to many of our key stakeholders. It matters to our associates. It matters to our consumers if you're a consumer-facing company in any way. And I think increasingly it's going to matter to our investors if you're a public company. So I actually believe if it matters, and I think it does, that it should be measured in some way. I think boards should hold CEOs and management teams accountable for diversity and inclusion and really all of its dimensions, from supplier diversity to the makeup of the organization from top to bottom. And what I would say, it'll create value for companies and protect reputations of brands, the better work that boards and CEOs and management teams do around this work.
Yeah, and I would just add also for your employees, right? I mean, the fact that I left the big 8 accounting firm is because I didn't see anybody that looked like me. And so was I going to dedicate the next 25 years of my life to a company where I did not think that there was any upward mobility? So I think employees these days, want to work for companies that they feel comfortable in, that they feel like they have upward mobility, and then also our stakeholders, right? Who we do business with, who does business with us. I mean, those are also deliberate decisions that we can impact, as well as the stakeholders who, want to do business with a certain company for a number of different reasons. So I think as we are becoming more and more transparent in this world through technology, I think things are going to be changing, sometimes more quickly due to laws, but certainly I think it's going to be better for everybody.
Thank you. So do you all have any closing remarks, Treasurer Ma, James, before we wrap this up?
the final thought for me is I'm actually optimistic. As challenging as the moment is that we sit in, I think the discussions that we're having are actually more direct around race and some of the structural and systemic issues related to racism. I think the boardroom is the perfect place to start to change policies that will influence both associates inside companies, but also the communities that they serve. So I'm actually excited about this current moment. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And I think if the leaders that are on this call commit themselves to making progress and being intentional around creating more diverse and inclusive boards and companies, I think we have a bright future in front of us.
Yeah, and I would just say we're all in this together, just like the pandemic, right? But management has a responsibility to be more deliberate about the makeup of their boards and their executive teams. And people need to be more intentional also if they want to sit on a particular board, also to maybe have a little campaign and, like James said, network, with the right people, understanding how the system works. So, I think these type of webinars sheds a lot of light on what is really happening out there. And the more we do this, and the more we support the 30% coalition, the more we are going to see more equity and gender balance moving forward. So I just thank you, Charlotte, for your leadership and your stick-to-itness and just calling out what is really happening out there, because without sort of watchdogs, things will not change. So thank you.
Thank you, Treasurer Ma and James, and I too feel optimistic. I think that we have a window of opportunity today that we've not had such a long time or ever. Unfortunately, fueled by some tragic events. I think that everybody is aware today that we do need to make a difference. I am available to discuss it with any of you on this call. I'm sure that James and Treasurer Ma are probably busier than I am, but I can get you in touch with them as well. So I appreciate everyone being with us. I hope that we have provided a bit of light at the end of the tunnel, and we wish you all the best in your continued road to diversity. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we'll put the link, women's registry at treasure.ca.gov, for people who want to submit resumes. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.